150 years into the past, a useless NPC became a member of the legendary hero's party. She took the role of the rogue and found her true purpose in her miserable life. Together, they defeated the Demon King, and she was gifted with the curse of immortality. The party returned to their kingdom to celebrate the start of a peaceful era along with the useless citizens. However, things will change 150 years later, where humans with power abuse the weak commoner in search for greater power. Black crows flew across a reddish sky, cawing around a battleground where Rogue was lying injured on the ground. She realized that she had failed her audition for an Isekai show because she had just regained her consciousness. That said, when she sat up, she wondered how long she had been unconscious. Suddenly, she felt the sharp pain surging through her chest, just like when your partner left you for someone else. And she realized that her ribcage was broken. Realizing that she still had a chance not to be an ugly, useless NPC, she looked around her and saw that some of her comrades had been wiped out. Elf, the ugly Giga Chad moron, was wounded and unconscious because her head hit a rock pillar, killing the remaining neurons in her useless brain. On the other hand, Wizard, another ugly waste of space, was crushed and knocked unconscious by a monster's hand because his love language seemed to be physical touch. Meanwhile, Priest, the true MVP, was still fighting against the enemy, and he had no intention of running away. Suddenly, a strong surge of dark power covered the sun, and Demon King appeared right before Hero, showcasing his massive sword and asking Hero if his blacksmith was Asian because it showed in the size of his sword. Demon King then used his skill and uttered the iconic word, "Arise." Sorry, wrong show. He used the Demon King's authority, which made Hero wonder what was going on. The strong surge of power began to merge with the ground, and a hand appeared in that instant. It turned out that Demon King cast a spell, summoning countless undead soldiers from beneath the earth as if he were the next Shadow Monarch. Confronted with this sight, Rogue shifted into his overlord form. With a loud cry to Priest, who had realized the authority, Rogue demanded power to fight. After Priest used his divine power to empower her, Rogue charged ahead, activating her skill, Authority of Light, Painful Oblivion, and began ninja-fruiting the undead one by one. Rogue used her parkour skills with her two blades, and she continued rampaging against the undead enemies with her dark-breathing sixth form, Dance of the Hard Bone. And just like that, Rogue told Hero to leave all the disputers to her before activating another dark-breathing form. Hero received her message loud and clear, so he erected his sword ready to penetrate the enemy's body. However, Demon King himself was preparing to deliver a finishing blow, but when Demon King unleashed his blade attack, Hero narrowly dodged it. Hero then used his light-breathing third form, multiple light slashes, and told him that size doesn't matter, performance does. Demon King got mad, so the two clashed their swords against each other. The impact was so much that a strong force was unleashed every time their sword clashed. At that moment, Hero took the opportunity to deliver a fatal blow, using his light-breathing first form, Absolute Slash, successfully severing one of Demon King's arms. Demon King did not see that coming and was surprised to see his arm falling apart from his body. The pain made Demon King fall on his knee, and Hero pointed his sword forward, declaring that their fight was over. To his surprise, Demon King's severed arm regenerated instantly, gripping Hero tightly in that instant. Demon King then accumulated a strong power, so Hero wondered if the menace was preparing to self-Isekai spell. However, Rogue suddenly leapt in, smiling at Hero, who asked her what the heck she was doing. Rogue used her dark-breathing second form, Severing Force, and successfully decapitated Demon King's hand, freeing Hero in that instant. Demon King's spell was about to explode, and Rogue told him that if he were to self-destruct, he should take along a defective human product like her. The explosion ensued, and Hero could only cry out Rogue's name. Rogue unleashed her powerful technique, the Transition of the Abyss, causing a massive dark pillar to appear and leaving Hero stunned by the sheer force of her attack. Priest also saw the pillar of strong dark force and could not believe his eyes upon witnessing such power. Meanwhile, when the dust cleared, Rogue's silhouette appeared, making Hero feel a sense of relief. However, his eyes witnessed horror upon seeing that a huge part of Rogue's left body had perished. Unfortunately, despite Rogue's effort, the Demon King was still alive. Demon King taunted them, telling them that they were not worthy to witness his handsome face. Hearing that, Rogue lashed out with a kick to his ugly, disgusting face, telling him to stop the cap. Demon King was surprised that Rogue was still alive, and Rogue looked at him with eyes full of hatred. At that point, Demon Lord retaliated, violently slamming Rogue's body to the ground and pinning her down with his massive crushing hand. Rogue could not do anything but shout in agony and pain. At that point, Priest stepped forward, granting Hero some buff cheats to become OP. Hero then charged, wielding the Holy Sword, Evil Slaying Sword, Ascalon, activated by the Authority of Light, which made him successfully penetrate through Demon King's defenses and slice him in two. Demon King groaned in pain, and not long after, his body collapsed, crashing to the ground. When the dust settled, Priest shouted, asking if they were both safe, so when Hero called him to come closer, it gave him a sense of relief. As the priest rushed over, he saw Rogue's body lying unconscious on the ground. They could not believe their eyes as Rogue's body started regenerating. While priest started healing Hiro, Demon King suddenly spoke, leaving Hiro completely dumbfounded in horror. However, Demon King told them not to worry because his application to an Isekai anime had been approved, so he declared their victory. Suddenly, his head separated from his body and fell to the earth. Yet even in his final moments, he delivered his closing remarks, telling Rogue that his ending will be his beginning. He warned her that countless choices awaited her, and that despair would follow her even when she was crushed under the weight of responsibility. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Demon King prayed for Rogue, stating that she should always move forward and hope that her journey could have a different ending than his. As his body disintegrated, he delivered the typical life-changing anime speech that no one cares about. Demon King then looked up at the sky with his hand raised, begging the heavens to open its gate for him. With that, his body started falling apart and completely dissolved into nothingness. Then, slowly, the darkness vanished, and everything turned back to normal. That said, the final battle between the Heroes Party and the Demon King ended. The Heroes Party was given a warm welcome by the people, and everyone was throwing confetti at them. In the days that followed, time flew in a blur. Wizard was captured by Dumbledore to return to Hogwarts and finish his studies. Elf decided to go back to her distant homeland to complete her cutting after her bulking journey. Priest bid his farewells to enjoy his worldly desires and bless more female plots along the way. Meanwhile, Hiro became the new king of their kingdom. Amidst the celebration for the new king, Rogue was clapping among the crowd just like a useless NPC. The false light faded, and life continued under the sun as if none of it had ever happened. Fear retreated from their daily lives, and so an era of peace continued for a long time. One night, approximately 150 years later, Rogue sat beneath a tree deep within the forest. Her body had become a complete skeleton, bearing the weight of centuries as she had lived far longer than mortal years should allow. After such a long time, it turned out that Rogue's real name was Ben Lyra. He reflected on the passage of time about unshakable mountains that had crumbled, plains that had turned to deserts, and the only constants seemed to be the stars above and herself. The curse of immortality forced upon her by the so-called blessing from Demon King had become a curse that would never fade. She had been wondering about its purpose, questioning what meaning remained in an existence that could not end, in a life where she had to stay alone forever. As she looked upward, a shooting star crossed the sky, and in that silent moment, a child wandered into the forest and stumbled upon her. Startled by the sight, the child bore witness to a truth long hidden 50 years after the fall of the Demon King. The time that had once stopped finally began to flow again. In the middle of the night, on the mountain behind Spear Tower Village, Rogue was surprised to see the child approaching her. The child seemed amazed by what she had just witnessed, while Rogue wondered what had brought the child there so late at night. The child grabbed Rogue and grabbed her by her cheek, bursting with excitement at the sight of a talking skeleton, as if her mom had bought her favorite toy. Rogue was taken aback by the child's excitement, while the child kept pulling at her cheeks. For a moment, Rogue gently took the child's hand and told the child to stop playing with her cheekbone. Rogue told the child that she had seen lost children in the mountains many times, but this was the first time she had been toyed with. Rogue then asked the child if they had not learned to run away when they saw something that was not human, but the child smiled and explained that she was taught not to judge the book by its cover. Rogue was surprised by that answer, and she admitted that the child's words made her feel sentimental for the first time in a while. Hearing that, the child called her a master and asked Rogue her identity before asking if she was a knight because she had a strange sword. That said, Rogue explained that she was an imperial messenger, and she was currently tasked to protect the mountain with a cursed sword. The child grew extremely excited at the news of her being an emperor's messenger and speculated that she must be very strong, which Rogue humbly confirmed. Rogue further explained that since she was entrusted with the emperor's messages, a task not for everyone, it required knowledge of high-level magic like necromancy. Rogue then used her magic to summon an undead Pokemon from beneath the ground, which amazed the child. The child exclaimed that Rogue must be really strong. The child then played the zombie Pokemon, and soon enough the child requested to be taken on as Rogue's disciple, expressing that she wanted to become strong. Rogue was delighted by the request because she was getting bored with her daily routine. However, Rogue dropped the bomb and gave her a big fat NO. Disappointed, the child started banging Rogue's head, pleading with her even more, and calling her an ugly, disgusting, heartless skeleton. Rogue's firm decision made the child feel upset. The next morning, Rogue was peacefully resting beneath a tree, when suddenly, the child shouted and jumped over her along with the zombie Pokemon, which startled and woke her up. Rogue then asked if the child would not go back home yet, so the child told her that she would not leave until Rogue agreed to teach her swordsmanship. Rogue angrily told the child to hurry home, warning that her parents would worry and that a skeleton could be mistaken for a child kidnapping monster. The child told her not to worry, and she explained that their house had burned down and that her parents had turned into ashes. Rogue became speechless upon hearing the child's sad backstory. The child insisted that she had to become strong and grip his wooden sword, asking if Rogue understood. The way the child turned to Rogue and smiled caused Rogue to see her old self in her. Rogue then sighed deeply and finally agreed to teach her swordsmanship, making the child feel overjoyed. Rogue raised her hand and told her that it was not befitting of a strong woman to keep refusing a child's request, which surprised the child because she had no idea that Rogue was a she. Her reaction pissed off Rogue, who remained silent. Seeing her continue playing with the zombie Pokemon, Rogue thought teaching the child would atone for his failure to deliver the Emperor's message, given that their people had suffered greatly. Rogue began teaching her how to properly handle and use a hard wooden sword. When they grew tired, they went beneath the tree for a quick nap. Later on, Rogue summoned 2 undead monsters for the child to fight. The monsters sometimes chased her, but sometimes it was the other way around. Later, the 2 decided to pretend to be ghosts, so when they saw a passerby, they scared him so much that he fainted. They got tired again and returned to sleep beneath the tree, with the child seemingly more comfortable than before. Her hand was resting on Rogue's skeletal hand, and she was leaning on Rogue as she fell asleep. Rogue resumed sword training, and over time, the child became a very skilled swordsman, as she could move, swing, and block a sword on par with Rogue's level. The child then smiled at Rogue, and Rogue smiled back because the noob had already become a pro. Then, 11 had passed. The child was already a full-grown lady, bathing in a forest lake. Rogue called and invited her to eat as she brought some freshly slain rabbit. She heeded her call and told her that she would help right away. While they cooked, the girl told Rogue that she had something serious to discuss. Rogue asked her what it was and commented that she was suddenly setting the mood. While eating together, the girl explained that the village she once lived in was abandoned after a sudden surge in monsters. Rogue then attentively listened as she explained that the event led the Empire to abandon them, and that hope had faded because everyone had given up. Rogue was confused by this news, so the girl told her that she had become quite strong. Rogue directly asked if she planned to become a hero, shocking the girl in the process. Rogue continued that, having taught her for 11 years, she could finally see what she was thinking. She then recalled a friend who wanted to become a hero to help people despite ridicule and doubt, insisting that one did not need qualifications to save people. The girl was very surprised by Rogue's words. Rogue, as the sole successor of the northern-style hunting techniques and her master, presented a dagger to the girl with the hope that she would draw it only with good intentions. The girl accepted the sword with respect, and Rogue instructed her to go and save the world, then return, promising her that she would always be there waiting for her. The next day, the girl bid farewell and left. When Rogue asked her how many years it would take her to execute her plan, she told her that it would really take a long time. Rogue then decided to protect the place until she returned, because she was confident that she would save the world and come back. After the girl left, Rogue felt sad and reflected that the connection had been brief, a past encounter, and that waiting again did not feel as frightening as before. One night, Rogue's concentration was interrupted by someone asking if she had gotten lost as well. Distracted, Rogue stated that she was not a master without looking up. Rogue then turned and saw her disciple, who was badly injured but still greeting her with a genuine smile. Rogue was shocked to see her, who asked if it had been a while. Her one leg was amputated, yet she laughed loudly as if he were not in a terrible situation. She told Rogue that the journey had been so wonderful that the Empire was vast beyond imagination, and that she encountered countless new places and things. She admitted there were many monsters, and she helped people with the skills Rogue taught her. People began to call her a hero, but the Emperor viewed her as a thorn in his side and ordered her assassination, declaring her an obstacle to his imperial power. Rogue suddenly hugged her, surprising her. Then she apologized, saying she felt dizzy, then clung tightly to Rogue while asking if Rogue had been well, and if Rogue cried when she was gone. Rogue did not directly answer, and instead she told her that she wanted to hear her story. The girl briefly recounted the untold parts of her journey until her last breath, making Rogue cry because of what her disciple had endured in the course of her life. Not long after, the soldiers arrived, and one of them angrily cursed the hero brat, saying she should have died peacefully instead of coming to the mountain. Their leader, a high-ranked knight, told them to shut their mouth that smelled like an anime convention because they were searching, prompting the angry soldier to apologize. As they advanced on the mountain, they spotted a figure, and the leader commanded the figure to pack quickly and descend the mountain. Rogue then slowly approached them as she unsheathed his sword. Then she appeared furious, holding a gleaming sword and asking them if they were sure that was a mountain. Rogue immediately summoned her undead army, which attacked the soldiers relentlessly, showing no mercy at all. Rogue explained that 120 years ago, while traveling the continent as a messenger, she found remnants of the Demon King's army in that place. She tore them apart and crushed their body like a natural soil fertilizer. Then she scattered their remains all over the area until the corpses became soil and a forest grew. Rogue explained that since then she had feared necromancers would misuse the place and had guarded it ever since, but it seemed that guarding it was no longer necessary. The summoned monsters brutally annihilated the soldiers, causing the others to panic. Their leader urged everyone to calm down and form up, insisting that a single necromancer could only control a limited number of undead and that waiting might resolve the situation. Before he could finish talking, he was shocked by the sight of an infinite number of undead army appearing right before his eyes. The knight questioned the necromancy that could create an army of undead and inquired about Rogue. Suddenly, an undead knight severed his head from his neck. Rogue then positioned her sword before declaring herself the mouth of the Emperor and the voice of the Empire. Rogue then penetrated Mother Earth with his thick, massive, hard sword, ripping the mountain earth open. Elsewhere, a child in a nearby village gazed up at the mountain, bewildered by the unfolding events. From the massive earth cracks she created, more undead armies emerged, ready to follow her orders. On top of the undead army, Rogue stood in sorrow and madness. She burned the message of the Emperor and declared that her old homeland should pay the price of its crimes. Some soldiers desperately escaped from Rogue's wrath in the nearby village. Just when the soldiers thought they had finally reached safety, Rogue's undead quickly followed and began slaughtering them inside the village. In desperation, one of the soldiers cried out that multiple undead had been sighted at the southern outskirts and called for all standby units to assemble immediately. The soldiers fought back against the monsters, some attempting to absorb them, but the battle only grew worse as more explosions erupted and even larger waves of the undead army appeared. Panic spread among the soldiers until amidst the chaos, a mysterious man chimed in, ordering everyone to move aside. He then prepared to use his sword, and his face reflected total concentration. Just then, he used his beast-breathing first form, Wolf Hunt, cleaving a monster in half, then moved with blinding speed to cut down several more. After dispatching the undead soldiers, he stood like a true Giga-Chad, flexing his hard rock abs. Then he demanded to know what kind of necromancer could command such an army. It turned out that the man was the Imperial Knight, Escher Soma. His eyes then fixed on a giant undead upon which Rogue stood, and he immediately understood that she was the necromancer behind it all. Rogue was still in her quiet mode while moving along with his giant undead soldier. Not long after, Rogue reached the location of Escher, who immediately prepared to unleash his sword. He then proceeded with his battle stance, ready to deliver a blow at any moment. And just like that, the limbs of the undead soldiers were sliced instantly. Escher also attacked the giant undead, striking the giant monster's legs, and making Rogue startle for a moment because she also received the same damage. After delivering his sword attack, Escher maneuvered from his sword attack, facing his enemies in the process. The giant undead slowly fell, along with Rogue and the other smaller undead soldiers, because of their severed legs. Upon looking at the damage received, Rogue noticed a power residue across her own leg, and recognized the impossible spear thrust aimed at the leg, and remembered the same wound on her disciple. Rogue realized that he was the one who had clapped her disciple hard, and her fury ignited, crashing everything on her path as she went to Escher's location. Meanwhile, Escher prepared to attack her as well, and their clash caused a massive explosion of force. When the dust settled, Rogue was above Escher, pressing him down with her blade. Their swords clashed in a very intense face-to-face moment. However, Escher closed his eyes and concentrated his power, shocking Rogue because he managed to force her blade down to the ground. Immediately after, Escher quickly maneuvered his blade to do his battle stance with his menacing aura. And just like that, he delivered his beast-breathing second form, Falcon Slash, which Rogue successfully dodged. Rogue then retaliated with a sudden ghostly punch that struck his leg, making him wonder what had just happened to his leg. Rogue delivered another ghostly punch that struck Escher's blade before Rogue overwhelmed him with relentless ghostly blows that knocked him to the ground. When Rogue pulled out her sword and was about to deliver a finishing blow, Escher fought back, maneuvering his body and giving Rogue a strong headbutt. Rogue then felt a sudden slice on her skull as Escher slashed her using his sword, forcing her to step back. Escher cursed her, declaring that it was the first time since facing the four knights that he had been pushed this far, and demanded to know what she truly was. Suddenly, Rogue's aura became even more menacing, revealing to Escher that she was an avenger. Gravely wounded, Escher realized he needed time and tried to stall by pressing her for answers. He mocked her claim of vengeance, telling Rogue that he had killed so many that it was impossible to know whose revenge she carried on. Escher knew that necromancy consumed immense stamina and that the greater the distance and number of undead, the higher the cost. He was further thinking of a plan when suddenly, Rogue's hand appeared right before him, placing it firmly on his face. Escher tried using his sword only to find out that his hand was already struck with Rogue's sword, shocking him in the process. Her grip tightened with crushing force as she condemned his pride in killing, declaring that such meaningless power had destroyed the Empire's people and even taken her disciple, the hero. Blood streamed from Escher's mouth as he struggled under her grip. Suddenly, he found the perfect timing to slash Rogue, but she simply stopped and kicked him away, throwing him against the broken walls. Breathing heavily, Escher laughed bitterly, calling her a monster who did nothing but whine. He justified the Empire's actions, claiming that all deaths had been necessary for its cause. Rogue told him coldly that his death at her hands would therefore be just as needed. Escher then smirked and declared that his death would not be on that day. A sudden light aura descended behind him, startling Rogue in the process. She then looked around, only to see a light aura that towered in the village. Elsewhere, what seemed like a crystal core stone was used by a new character, locking Rogue's summoned monsters within barrier-like prisons. Just then, Escher smiled because he knew that the mission was already completed. At that moment, the anti-undead barrier shield was activated from the depths of the mountain, manifesting a light that exuded what seemed like a force field. The cross-light pillar grew larger, and several more appeared from the mountain, enlarging the force field even more. The force was fast approaching, obliterating the undead army one by one. As the undead soldiers slowly dissolved right before the human soldiers' eyes, they cheered as if victory was already theirs. With confidence, Escher told Rogue that her undead army had been completely annihilated. He explained to Rogue that the barrier generator was crafted by the legendary wizard of the hero's party, praised as the greatest in history 120 years ago, and that even she would not last long within its reach. Rogue told him calmly that she already knew because she knew that wizard created it. Escher was puzzled by her response, and Rogue dismissed the loss of her army, telling him that she could simply raise another one. She further explained that those who would truly stand with her were not the undead, but the Empire's exploited citizens who would join her vengeance. At that very moment, she vowed that she would bring the Empire to its end. Rogue recalled how much the hero's party hated war, but they were forced to seize what others cherished to protect their own. And those were days when death was a certainty. Even though she thought those times were over, the reality proved the opposite. That said, she wondered if so many lives had vanished for such a future, but could only answer herself with uncertainty. In her skeleton form, Rogue gazed from a distance at the memories of her companions. She questioned what she had been thinking when she once walked onto the battlefield, who she had fought for, and where she was supposed to go in this era without them. With no answer, she kept walking forward. Then, about 4 days after the hero extermination incident, the scene shifted to the northern adventurers' village. Rogue entered an open building, holding out a map and explaining that she had lost her way while traveling north along the mountains. She politely asked for directions to the people inside the building, but a man dismissed her, reminding her that the place was not a guide office but an adventurer's guild. She insisted it was the only place open, and that she only wanted directions before leaving quietly. Another man angrily interrupted, calling her bold for barging in just like that, but the first man raised his hand to silence him. He grinned and told Rogue that she was quite strange for someone claiming to be a wanderer, and that she reeked of blood. He then mentioned a grim rumor going around about Spear Tower Village across the mountains. Hidden nearby, a masked man listened closely as the man revealed that a necromancer had killed knights and ravaged the village. While the man then speculated about Rogue's true identity, he quickly threw his knife at Rogue's head. The man then looked at Rogue, who easily caught the knife, revealing her undead overlord appearance right before his eyes. With a cold stare, Rogue warned him to be careful who he picked a fight with, and slammed her fist into the floor, shocking the man in the process. When the dust cleared, the man looked at Rogue and saw that beneath the cracked wooden floor, the masked man was stabbed in the chest with the same knife he had thrown at her. Even after realizing that their ambush failed, the man was still unfazed. Just then, he ordered his men to kill her right away, so 2 attackers rushed toward her. Rogue, irritated, reminded them all she had only asked for directions. Then, with a menacing aura, she told them that what would happen next would be their fault. One attacker charged with a sword, claiming that he would eliminate Rogue. He slashed his sword against Rogue, but she dodged it successfully like a true action star. Then she delivered consecutive ghostly punches and a finishing blow to his head that made her smack him down to the floor. The second man immediately slashed her with his spear, but she dodged the attack like a ghostly snake. Then she caught his spear, grabbed his collar, lifted him up, and slammed him on the floor as if she were in the World Wrestling Federation. Not long after, 2 more attackers surrounded her, and they were moving like the Flash at an incredible speed. Soon enough, they managed to move closer to Rogue, and just like that, the 2 attackers revealed themselves, ready to penetrate Rogue's body with their tiny blades from 2 opposite directions. Suddenly, the 2 attackers' knives clash against each other because Rogue leapt above them, forcing their knives against each other, leaving them stunned. As expected from Rogue, she immediately grabbed their heads and slammed them both into the floor with her bare hands. Suddenly, Rogue vanished quickly, making the man wonder where Rogue had gone. Just then, the man sensed her behind him, so he quickly drew his twin blades and immediately stepped back. The man then focused his eyes on Rogue before using his wind-breathing 5th form Dance of the Twin Blades, destroying the wooden table in the process while Rogue dodged every single slash. Immediately after, the man proceeded with his battle stance and delivered a deadly thrust, which Rogue quickly dodged. However, the man had already anticipated that move from her, so he used his first attack as bait. Then he quickly used his wind-breathing 3rd form, Wind Decapitation, which Rogue successfully dodged using her pro parkour skills. Rogue retaliated with a powerful kick, forcefully hurled the enemy backward, sending him crashing so hard into the wall. The remaining attackers stared in disbelief, shocked that their leader had fallen in a single blow. Rogue stood with a menacing aura, spreading fear among the other adventurers. She then looked at them, demanding to know who would come next, but a sudden commanding voice stopped the fight, making Rogue look at him. A middle-aged, yellow-haired man approached, telling Rogue to end it right there, and promising to give her what she wanted. The other adventurers looked at him, who introduced himself as Thor Vinland, the guildmaster of the Empire's northernmost adventurers guild, and invited Rogue to speak elsewhere. Inside the guildmaster's office, Thor explained the story of a skeleton menace that haunted the mountains behind Spear Tower. Village was a tale familiar to every adventurer. Despite many requests to investigate and multiple search parties sent out, none had ever returned with proof. While looking at Rogue, he admitted he had dismissed it as a rumor until he witnessed it with his 2 eyes. Thor smirked, so Rogue slammed her fist on his table, breaking it in the process. Rogue demanded to know what he truly wanted and stop all the cap. Thor then pulled out a pack of cigarettes before explaining how the guild had been neglected by the Empire for a long time. He further explained how villagers abandoned their homes, died in vain, and how they trembled in fear each day, thinking monsters would devour them. Thor then used his lighter and revealed how the villagers were waiting slowly for death to come. Rogue then gave him some real talk, asking why they had not resisted the Empire, and explaining that if nothing had been done, nothing would change at all. Thor countered her judgmental remarks, telling her that they could do nothing, because law and order in the abandoned lands fell to those who remained, and adventurers gathered to protect their homes. Rogue asked if they had never thought to form an alliance to fight the Empire, so Thor told her that such a thing would not be simple, for it meant war. Thor explained that it was not always about courage, especially when countless people would die from it. Rogue listened attentively, as Thor revealed how they had waited for someone to save them, and how they had endured everything, waiting for a glimpse of hope. Then hope arrived in the form of the hero, who happened to be Rogue's disciple, and the one who lifted them from despair. Rogue's was swallowed by sadness as Thor explained how they embraced that glimpse of hope, but the hero also failed, and now he realized what they had truly lacked was hatred. Thor declared that it did not matter if their homes were destroyed or if tomorrow never came. If they could kill the Empire, then dying would be worth it, for that was war. He requested Rogue's help, promising to assign 2 adventurers immediately, and later gather all their resources to support her. Thor did not care if Rogue was an Avenger or a demon. It did not matter because he and his people wanted to join her war. Rogue, unsettled by his plea, apologized for destroying his guild and admitted it was also her fault for abandoning the Empire until their village had been neglected. At that moment, Rogue pulled out something from his pocket, throwing a charm-like object before revealing that it had been 150 years since she last accepted a request. Thor could not believe his eyes upon seeing her Ruby-class adventurer tag, a rank long extinct since the Great War. Thor, realizing her true standing, asked Rogue who the heck she really was. As she left, Rogue told him not to mind it, for she was only a wraith of a filthy past. She then declared her first destination would be the Northern Mountain Range, the most dreadful range on the continent, where snow never ceased to fall. A few days later, Rogue's party had reached the Northern Mountain Range, where Rogue asked her party members from the guild how long it had been since they left the village. A scarlet-haired man who used binoculars told her that it was already their 5th day of discreet movement along the mountain range. Rogue noted the fast pace for a secret march, and the scarlet-haired man explained that they could not afford to run into the Imperial Army after all. She agreed, then pointed toward a group ahead staying in a temporary camp and questioned who they were. Rogue wondered how they had managed to get in front of them, so the man explained that they were not a search party chasing after them. The black-haired lady then chimed in, telling them that they were survivors from Spear Tower Village, joined by looters returning to the capital. She further explained that judging by their lack of winter gear, they had likely been cut off while moving along the northern mountain range. Rogue then asked the black-haired lady what lay along the lower path. She then introduced himself as Muran Same and his companion as Sword Harriet, urging her to at least remember their names. Muran explained that the lower road passed by small households that would likely be raided for supplies. Harriet even added that plundering was common for Imperial Knights since the current emperor had taken the throne. Rogue then coldly told them that she must end them right there and then. Her words scared the heck out of Harriet, but before he could react, Rogue vanished from their sight. The two were left dumbfounded upon realizing that Rogue descended rapidly. Rogue then struck the looters' location with her sudden attack, causing them great confusion. One soldier wondered about the commotion, while another questioned if it was an ambush. Then, Rogue appeared with a menacing aura of a true overlord, confirming it was indeed an ambush. From the top of the cliff, Harriet asked her if she was desperate to die, but Muran told him Rogue was already dead. Down below, soldiers hurried to alert their chief about the intruder, but Rogue was already in his menacing element, slashing them one by one, ready to annihilate them all. Rogue fought fiercely, and despite being surrounded from all sides, she simply cut them all down using his dark-breathing fifth-form omnidirectional blade. The soldiers were left debilitated upon feeling their bodies separating from each other, causing despair to those who experience her wrath. Not long after, a female knight shouted for her troops to block the retreat and surround the enemy. However, before she could continue talking, Rogue appeared behind her and decapitated her head. Rogue then looked at her severed head, mocking her words, repeating them with anger, holding the head on her sword and staring into her enemy's empty eyes, remarking that they were nothing but decoration. Rogue summoned a monstrous army of undead from the depths of the underworld. Soon enough, she commanded them to ravage and annihilate her enemies. Her allies were watching from above, and Harriet realized that the power she had shown at the Adventurers Guild had not been her full strength at all. The undead soldiers crushed the enemy forces, eliminating the soldiers one after another. Rogue even summoned an undead horse that she rode herself, cutting down everything that blocked her way, and declaring herself as the Wraith of Spear Tower Village. Seeing the battle nearly concluded, Miran told Harriet that they should go down. Rogue's horse stopped, and Rogue watched over the battlefield, realizing that the tide had turned, which meant it would all be over soon. Not long after, a soldier suddenly sneaked behind Rogue, ready to cut her down with his spear. Rogue managed to dodge, but his undead horse got decapitated in the process. Enraged by what happened, Rogue leapt in midair and kicked the soldier's head, breaking his mask in that instant. As he fell, a familiar pendant slipped from his neck, and the sight of it made her remember the man who gave him the same pendant as a form of apology. Back then, Rogue was confused about the pendant, so the man, who was also the leader of those who attacked her at the guild, explained why they doubted someone like her. When Rogue asked him what kind of pendant that was, the man embarrassedly explained that it was a charm made by his daughter, wishing for an adventurer's safe return. Rogue then promised to thank her daughter, but the man had revealed that his daughter had been killed by the Imperial Army 2 years earlier, leaving her speechless with what she had heard. She had apologized for being careless to the man, who told her not to, explaining that everyone there carried the same wounds, cursed the Empire, and burned their remaining lives for revenge. He had warned her not to ruin her life with the same hatred, reminding her that someone was always waiting for everyone in the world. Back at the present time, the soldier, who called her Skull, begged her not to go too far with him. While Rogue was contemplating, one of the undead soldiers penetrated his meat from behind us in his long spear. As he met his doom, Rogue listened to him uttering apologies to his daughter Michelle before dying. Rogue silently watched him take his last breath and felt a deep sympathy for him. That said, she swiftly avenged him by killing the undead with his ghostly punch that squashed the undead's body like a tomato. Not long after, his two allies reunited with her, and Miran praised her efforts, promising to handle the cleanup operation so that she could rest, but Rogue only stood there quietly. Moments later, they did some cremation 101, burning down all corpses to crisps. Miran wondered why she burned all corpses when he could use them to create a larger undead army. On the other hand, Rogue stood quietly while looking at the burning corpses. Miran was confused as to who she was doing all of these, and Harriet added that her expression carried too much sorrow. Suddenly, the flame grew bigger, and from within Rogue she heard the voice of the previous Demon King, reminding her of what he told her before. The voice reminded her that she would be forced into making countless choices and would be sunk in despair. It even told her that despair had only just begun, and that she could not escape fulfilling her miserable fate. Rogue told the voice to shut his filthy mouth, demanding he stay quietly in the underworld where he belonged. However, the voice only laughed hard, taunting Rogue further, and telling her that her ugly, disgusting face won't give him a normal life at all. Rogue did not give him the response that he wanted, so the voice disconnected her from the telephatical voice chat. The voice then vanished while Rogue was still standing before the massive flame from burning corpses. Elsewhere, a knight bearing a red flag was rushing towards a burning castle, where a lady with orange hair and a king's crown was singing while the screams of the burning people felt like music to her ears. She then savored the smell of burning flesh as if she were a cannibal or anything like that. Suddenly, a soldier arrived, calling her Lady Frey, and informing her that the soldiers wanted to play soccer using the princess's head as their ball, but she seemed not interested at all. Frey told the soldier that she was too heartbroken because she had expected the kingdom to be large enough to make the battle worthwhile, but it had ended too blandly. Looking bored, she then wondered if anyone in the Empire was crazy enough to fight her, but the knight dismissed the idea. All of a sudden, the knight bearing the red flag loudly announced a decree from the Emperor, informing them about a massive undead army led by a necromancer. Thus, they were tasked to subjugate them all. After hearing the Emperor's decree, Frey grinned and did her iconic evil laugh. She was delighted that a lunatic like her appeared just when she needed one. Just then, she threw the crown and ordered his troops to assemble. Her troops arrived one by one, and with a menacing aura, they were all ready to put on some action. And just like that, Frey officially declared that they would head to war. The party continued their journey together over the snowy northern mountain range, where Rogue was walking behind the two adventurers. Murin grew restless over Rogue's D&D status and expressed his frustration to Harriet, telling him that it had been 2 weeks and Rogue still had not lifted his silent mode. Rogue, on the other hand, simply walked after them like a pet following its masters. Meanwhile, Harriet was still dumbfounded by how Rogue's skull floated in mid-air like a magnetic levitation globe. These thoughts made Harriet recall his past conversation with the Guildmaster, who told them that Rogue, the undead from Spear Tower Village, was probably related to the hero who had just recently died. Murren and Harriet listened to Thor as he explained that Spear Tower Village was the place where she spent her childhood. Thor further explained that the time when the hero fled from the knights to that village coincided with the undead army incident. More than anything, Thor recognized that the fighting style that Rogue displayed was a mirror image of the hero. Murren and Harriet continued listening to their guildmaster, who told them that Rogue was probably not evil, but just like them, she was only despairing and struggling. The leader admitted not knowing why Rogue was heading to the northern mountain range, but he was sure that she was not their enemy. But he also had no guarantee he would be their ally either. Yet he could sense that Rogue was certainly the key to bringing down the Empire. That said, the Guildmaster asked both Rank 5 frontliners Sword Harriet, a Quartz Shield Warrior, and Murren Same, a Quartz Berserker, who were both from the north, to guide Rogue the way. Harriet had voiced out his concern, telling him that Rogue was too unpredictable, and whether she would really act according to their will. Hearing that, the Guildmaster told him not to worry because he had a good intuition, before handing him the letter. Back to the present, Harriet finished recalling Thor's words, so he decided to approach Rogue and show a specific direction. At that moment, Rogue noticed that it was the Spear Tower Village, so Harriet suggested they stop by. Along the way, Rogue was overwhelmed by memories of his time with her disciple, who back then had made her a paper bag mask that she had worn to freely roam around the village. She remembered how the two of them had gone into a pub together, with her disciple dragging him inside despite her reluctance. She had asked the shopkeeper for 2 tankards of PG grape juice, and the shopkeeper prepared them right away. Her disciple told her that there were many things they could enjoy inside. That said, the two played dart shooting games, and as expected, Rogue's darts were all bullseye, so the crowd went wild after witnessing her impeccable skills. After that, dancing and other entertaining performances filled the place, while the two of them sat at their table and continued drinking their PG grape juice. To Rogue, it had been a rare moment of happiness, and for the first time in many years, she had felt joy in that place. Back in the present, he walked into the same pub once again, but it was no longer the same. The shooting boards were still there, but some of the chairs and tables were destroyed. The interior looked unchanged, yet the place was completely empty and worn out, making Rogue feel a deep sadness until someone placed a glass of beer before him. The pub keeper told Rogue that their pub had closed a long time ago and that he had come too late, perhaps chasing old memories. She recognized Rogue and asked if he no longer used the paper bag disguise before looking her in the eye and giving her a wink. Rogue was confused, so she asked her how she had recognized her. The pub keeper then drank the PG grape juice and confirmed if she was the hero's mentor, because she had heard many stories about her, even though she never revealed that she was a talking skeleton. She drank the PG grape juice up to the last drop before informing Rogue that the wine they were drinking was called Dione, which was a cheap wine signifying a new beginning. The pub keeper revealed that the child had entrusted her with that wine, telling her that she would one day drink it together with Rogue before setting off on a journey. Meanwhile, outside the pub, Herdal was approached by an adventurer, wishing him safety before his departure. When Herdal had started looking around, he realized that the place was already a ghost village, filled with empty houses. The pub keeper told Rogue that their country was already ruined, and she understood why Rogue had risen. But she told him that what he was attempting now was wrong. Maybe in the end he might save the Empire's people, but she questioned whether that was truly the image her disciple had wished for him. Rogue remained silent after hearing everything, so the shopkeeper answered the question herself, telling her that it was not. The pub keeper told Rogue that her disciple's wish for her was something brighter before she handed her the cloak she had worn as a hero, her pendant, and the sword he had given her. Rogue was stunned upon seeing her disciple's belongings, so the pub keeper explained that her disciple had left these items behind with instructions to pass them on to him. She reminded him of what her disciple once desired: gathering comrades, saving people, defeating evil, like the fairy tales of the Ruby-class adventurers long ago. What her disciple had really wanted in her life was an adventure like the hero's party. The pub keeper told Rogue that her disciple's ultimate desire was to go on an adventure with her. Rogue was speechless, but he moved his hand and held the glass of PG grape juice in his hand and drank it. Rogue then contemplated her words deeply, telling herself that hatred blinds the eyes and even the wise lose their way, and so she wondered if she was repeating the same mistakes again. Placing her hand on the table after finishing the drink, he thanked the pub keeper for her time. The pub keeper smiled and asked where Rogue was heading next. Rogue then wore her disciple's cloak and told the pub keeper that since she had drunk the wine of new beginning, she must leave already. However, this time, not for revenge, but for the adventure the hero and her disciple had once dreamed of. In his mind, she pictured herself along with Hero and her disciple smiling together, ready to begin the tale of the Skeleton Herald. As Rogue stepped out of the pub, Harriet told Moran that Rogue had come out already, so Moran asked her if her conversation was all done. Moran informed her that from that point they will take the normal road, and wondered if she was freezing cold because she only had bones left in her body. Rogue did not like sarcasm, so she told them to set off already and mocked them, calling them incompetent juniors. Moran grew confused and told Harriet that there was a change in her tone, sensing that something in her aura had shifted. Harriet then smiled, happy at the fact that Rogue's worries were finally over. Harriet recalled the Guildmaster's words about Rogue and his remarkable judgment to people. Rogue began walking ahead, and Harriet called out for her to wait. Along the way, Harriet explained to Rogue the current 10 ranking division among adventurers. Diamond rank was the highest, and Earthstone rank was the lowest, and these ranks were often grouped into transcendent, upper, middle, and lower ranks. For safety purposes, adventurers could not accept quests higher than their rank, and the higher the rank, the more expensive the commission fees became. Harriet further explained that most ordinary people rarely passed the 7th rank. Topaz and those who did were called transcendents. Adventurers belonging to 8th ranks onward could explore uncharted regions alone, hold back monster waves at the front lines, or serve as generals in the Imperial Army. As Harriet summarized, a goblin appeared in the forest, so he decapitated the ugly, disgusting goblin, and continued explaining that the lower-ranked adventurers' job was basically to be the goblin slayers. Soon after, a massive Cyclops monster appeared before them. Marin jumped on its back like a true menace, slicing the head of the ugly one-eyed giant like it was some kind of birthday cake, and explaining that the monster could be killed by middle-ranked adventurers. Harriet's eyes showed fear upon pointing out some monsters, but not long after, Rogue's sword turned bloody as he stood atop 3 monsters that upper-ranked adventurers could kill. After witnessing that, Harriet was pissed off, asking Rogue if she was listening to his explanation, which she confirmed. When Rogue asked the two about their ranks, Marin revealed that they were both on the 5th rank, Quartz. Rogue then realized that the ranking system had changed drastically since her adventurer days. While Marin was looking at the dead monsters, Harriet asked if she was an adventurer, which Rogue confirmed, revealing that she had the ruby rank and was quite a popular female warrior. To Harriet, the ruby rank sounded familiar, but suddenly Marin laughed so hard, telling that Rogue was a big joke, claiming to have a rank that only existed in fairy tales. Hearing the insult, Rogue used her sword's dark power and summoned her undead legion. Marin stopped laughing upon feeling enormous monsters behind her. When the two adventurers looked back, Harriet was terrified to the bones to see that the 3 strong monsters had turned into zombie monsters, while Marin stayed in her nonchalant state. While Marin was dancing along with the zombie monsters, Harriet was begging Rogue to send the undead monsters back to the underworld. Rogue then had undone the spell, and the zombie monsters were sent back to the underworld, relieving Harriet, whom Marin got pissed off because of his cowardice. Rogue laughed and mocked him, saying that for a Norther, he had the guts of a cowardly loser. As she spent more time with them, Rogue realized that the feeling was familiar to the one she had felt with the hero's party and with her disciple. Rogue recalled her disciple's joy upon doing some training with her. Marin, however, asked why she was heading to the northern mountains, explaining that the place was filled with monsters, and even the outskirts were a veritable monster park. Rogue explained that she had promises to fulfill there, things to search for, and debts to settle. Originally, she had planned to storm the Empire with her undead legion from 120 years ago, but Escher and Wizard had destroyed her entire army with a powerful barrier. Harriet wondered if such a thing was even possible, so Rogue told them it had not been any ordinary barrier. It had been crafted by Wizard from the hero's party, specifically designed to stop undead waves used at the front lines of the Demon King's domain, and its power had been immense. Rogue admitted that she could not overthrow the Empire without her undead legion, so she would need a human army instead, shocking Harriet with her planned revelation. She then confirmed their speculation, telling them that she would make the northern people her allies. Harriet was horrified at the idea of recruiting those insane fur-covered beasts as her allies, and even Moran reminded her that they were the most powerful army on the continent. Rogue then told them that her original plan had been to take the Emperor's head and use it as a soccer ball, but her disciple had talked her out of it. Moran listened to Rogue as she revealed that instead of seeking revenge, her goal was to rebuild the Empire the right way. Rogue then shifted the topic, telling them that they were the ones who had failed and run away from the Great Hunt, which left the two off guard by her interrogation. Rogue, however, assured them that she would cut them some slack since the road ahead was long, so she challenged them to show her what they could. Harriet nervously told Rogue that they were in a hurry and urged them to simply continue. Rogue, however, told them that it was too late, and she unleashed her summoning magic. Rogue was stunned by the sight of a massive Minotaur undead monster, announcing she would give them 10 seconds to run for their lives. Harriet began complaining about their unfair situation, so he urged Moran to stop Rogue as well. However, to his surprise, Moran was no longer beside him because she had already run away after hearing the 10-second allowance, telling Harriet to survive no matter what. Rogue began her countdown while Harriet still froze in the same place. Then, when Rogue declared the end of the countdown, the undead Minotaur monster chased after Harriet, who was running for his dear life, while Rogue laughed, enjoying every moment. Rogue then thought of her disciple Hero and all the others who had vanished, yet whose memory she still carried within. That said, Rogue shouted that Harriet and Moran were the second batch of clueless idiot disciples she had never asked for. Harriet listened to Rogue, telling them that they should be thankful because she was personally training them so they would turn into human weapons. Moran and Harriet ran desperately for their lives, while Rogue resolved silently that this time she would not lose her way. She asked her departed loved ones to watch over her, so she could continue to live as herself, and declared that she would never again be lonely. In the mountains, their chaos caused an explosion, sending thick fog across the forest. From a distance, someone noticed it, and it was Frey, who stood with her soldiers, gazing toward the source of the chaos, declaring target locked with an evil grin of a true menace. The massive undead Minotaur monster began attacking Moran and Harriet, who were still running for their dear lives. The undead Minotaur monster punched Harriet, but he managed to dodge it, and the ground beside him crumbled into dust from the massive impact. Harriet panicked after realizing that the strike could have killed him for real, so as the dust scattered from the attack, he begged Rogue to stop. While running away from the scene, someone appeared running toward the undead monster. Harriet wondered who she was, but she was no other than Frey, who moved forward with visible excitement. Frey quickly climbed onto the monster and directed her attention straight to the necromancer. Rogue froze in confusion at the enemy's sudden arrival. Using her space-breathing third-form spiral disc cutter, Frey struck towards Rogue with her sword, but Rogue blocked the blow with her blade as well. Frey gave Rogue her signature saw-teeth smile and greeted her like a long-lost friend. Her weird actions only made Rogue become even more bewildered. Frey then pressed down her sword, unleashing her space-breathing first-form spiral drill, which struck Rogue from an unexpected angle, but Rogue still managed to block it. That said, Frey used a fearsome sword technique, killing the Earthspine dragon backbone, which chopped the undead monster into several pieces, causing massive destruction in the area. Murren recoiled in alarm at the sudden turn of events, without noticing that danger was coming her way too. Rogue steadied herself as she landed on the ground, scolding Frey for ambushing her despite their unfamiliarity. Frey listened as Rogue demanded to know her identity, so Frey got excited. Then she answered with an eerie smile, introducing herself as Frey. She revealed to Rogue that she was one of the Empire's 4 knights, known as Frey of War, and she declared an intent to wage a war against her. Rogue realized that Frey was one of the 4 knights that Escher told her back then. Frey confirmed the connection and then taunted her that, after the unnecessary greetings, she could now begin fighting, which Rogue fearlessly accepted. Frey charged at Rogue and their blades clashed in a deadly, massive, impactful explosion that shattered nearby trees. Frey laughed and moved quickly, followed by a ground strike while Rogue absorbed the impacts with her sword. Frey immediately tried moving closer to Rogue, which made Rogue almost lose her balance. Frey used her spiral technique and delivered yet another ground strike, which Rogue managed to dodge again. Frey launched a flurry of relentless attacks that the Rogue attempted to block, but Frey suddenly kicked Rogue, sending her flying. Fortunately, Rogue collided her sword into the ground to steady herself and avoid falling to the ground. Rogue watched Frey's movements with rising astonishment, thinking that Frey moved like something inhuman and noting the bizarre reach and joint motions that made the fight feel unnatural. Frey moved in for another assault, and Rogue tossed a small stone against Frey's eyes. The stone drew Frey's attention and created an opening for an attack. Seizing the moment, Rogue rained consecutive strong ghostly punches onto Frey's face and body. Frey suffered pain from the barrage and countered with a sweeping sword strike that sent the Rogue skidding backward amid a cloud of dust. Frey pressed her finger to her eyes and mocked Rogue's lack of an army to fight along with her. She then asked her why she could not focus properly, asking her if her 2 lackeys were distracting her and promising to bury them along with her. Hearing her threat, Rogue grew mad and asked Frey if she could really eliminate her. Emerging from the dust, Rogue acknowledged that Frey might be able to kill her, praising Frey's battle instinct and unnaturally long reach and strength. Rogue, however, stood fully, raising her 2 hands and asserting that Frey's poor eyesight could be her fatal flaw. Frey realized that Rogue was up to something, but before she could react, Rogue commanded a massive undead monster to devour her alive, catching Frey off guard. At that very moment, Rogue urged Murren and Harriet to run away from the battlefield before throwing smoke bombs, creating an enormous cloud of smokescreen. When the smoke cleared, a colossal serpent-like undead monster appeared with Murren and Harriet riding on it. Complaining that Rogue could have informed them about it first, Harriet began crying from his burning eyes, caused by Rogue's smokescreen that was made from strong, spicy peppers. Murren, on the other hand, asked if Rogue had any plan, warning her that if Frey truly was one of the 4 knights, even an army might not be enough to stop her. Rogue admitted that stopping Frey might be impossible at her current state. However, she urged them to retreat beyond the boundary markers, instructing them to make as much noise as possible to facilitate their escape. Murren protested and insisted they check whether the knights had already caught up. Several soldiers rode the undead creature that the rogue had summoned, and even Frey arrived, running towards them. Frey was surprised by the massive undead monster, demanding to know whether Rogue intended to go to an all-out war against them. Rogue prepared her sword, Bokbur Ryu, but Frey also prepared her sword, Nasen Ryu. Then, the two of them delivered powerful sword strikes. Rogue used her flashlight authority Slaughter Strike, while Frey used her Chukgeo Mountain Pigeon Strike. Frey's attack overpowered Rogue's attack, and the strike cut through the undead monster's head, causing another massive explosion in the forest near the snowy mountain. When the smoke settled, Frey laughed and declared the scene intriguing, listing Rogue's trick from the colossal undead monster, strange smoke bombs, and a skeleton wielding bizarre sword techniques. Frey liked how these elements made their fight interesting, and she taunted Rogue for more. Rogue wiped dust from her face and scolded Frey for dirtying a lady's clothes, calling her a villain. Frey mocked Rogue upon knowing she was a lady, and suggested she lacked eyes suitable for looking into a mirror. Rogue returned the insult, calling Frey the coward who had run and been caught, but Frey countered, calling her a pathetic little freaky undead bastard with nothing left but bones. Frey gave her a blank stare and asked her why she did not call forth her undead army. Rogue remained quiet while Frey expressed her disappointment, noting that while the undead looked strong, something seemed off, and asked again if her two lackeys were distracting her. Frey moved closer and whispered to Rogue whether killing the children would help her focus and make her fight with full fury. Rogue paused Frey briefly and then accused her of being overconfident while needlessly moving closer to her enemy. Frey smiled and declared that she desired to crush her head into powder. Suddenly, an arrow struck Frey, causing her to step back, as she was followed by a rain of arrows, two of which pierced her arm. Rogue then taunted Frey, telling her to pay respect before the mother mountain of the northern tribes, the Northern Mountain Range. Frey let out a short laugh, realizing why Rogue had gone all the way to the yard of the northern village, and with no hesitation she broke the arrows in half. She then moved her arms in a circular motion as if she just had some muscle pain, and summoned several soldiers with a cold smirk. Rogue then told her to do all she could while she would only wait for as long as possible. Frey then smiled at her, declaring that for the most fun war ever, she retreated and told her that she would be looking forward to fighting her again. Rogue stared back in disbelief, wondering if she had gone insane. Soon enough, the party reunited, and Harriet was in great relief that Rogue was safe. But Moran told them to look toward a massive tree nearby, asking Rogue about the warriors that surrounded them. Rogue suddenly remembered the warriors and waved at them casually as if greeting some old friends, and thanked them for their help earlier. However, one of the warriors responded by shooting an arrow that went straight into Rogue's palm. The archer gave her an evil laugh, amused at the sight of a talking skeleton, and mocked her about cutting off his head to use it as a drinking cup. Rogue instantly recognized them as the same troublesome northern warriors, and even Harriet and Moran confirmed that was how they were. While the northern warriors were all eyes on them, Rogue without hesitation turned around before giving the signal for everyone to run. They began sprinting away as the northern warrior chased after them. A northern warrior with a poisoned spear announced that intruders had been found. As arrows and spears began to rain on them, Harriet yelled at Rogue in confusion, asking why their supposed allies were attacking instead. While running away, Moran reminded Rogue that she claimed to have a deal with the northern warriors, which she confirmed, but revealed that the deal was made 100 years ago. Rogue then suggested that since they were from the north, mentioning their names might help them survive, but Moran disagreed, explaining that they were actually fugitives, especially Harriet, who had some personal past issues with the northern tribes. Rogue then tried to calm things down as she turned to the villagers and asked them to stop attacking. She introduced himself as Edward Ben Lyra, a member of the northern tribe, and requested to speak with their village chief. The villagers doubted him, asking if a skeleton could really be one of their tribe members. That said, Rogue smiled, thinking she had solved the misunderstanding, and reassuring Harriet and Moran that everything was fine. But in the next moment, they found themselves locked in a prison cell, and Harriet mocked Rogue, sarcastically thanking him for her great communication skills that landed them in a cell. Rogue then gave Harriet a ghostly punch on the head, knocking him unconscious, while Moran asked Rogue if she truly belonged to the northern tribes, so Rogue revealed that she used to be, a long time ago. Harriet regained consciousness and warned Moran that the situation was worse than it seemed because when the warriors were taking him away, he noticed that they were in the Red Ram village. Harriet was feeling depressed at his current predicament, making Rogue feel confused, so Moran explained that their original plan was only to escort her to the mountain entrance and return. After hearing that, Rogue realized the severity of their situation. Soon enough, a guard struck the prison bars and announced that their village chief had summoned Rogue. That said, the guard escorted him to the village chief's hall, and Rogue could tell that nothing had drastically changed at all. The party was put on trial, where the village chief, Red Silk, confronted Rogue with anger, calling him out for pretending to be a member of the northern tribes. He then looked at Harriet and Moran, mocking them for returning without any shame. Harriet trembled and tried to deny, telling the chief that he had the wrong person. Meanwhile, Rogue insisted to Red Silk that it was just a misunderstanding, claiming she truly was a member of the Northern Tribe and asking him to be freed so they could talk properly. But the chief grew more furious, declaring that pretending to be one of them was a grave sin. He even told Rogue that the ones he arrived with were failures, unworthy of being a member of the Northern Tribes. Rogue then mocked the idea that after failing the Great Hunt, they would never be treated as people anymore, and expressed her disappointment that nothing had changed since then. Suddenly, Rogue broke his handcuffs, pissing off Red Silk, who ordered his guards not to interfere, claiming he would handle this pile of bones himself. Rogue continued mocking her, so the chief quickly rose from his throne with rage, gripping his axe tightly, declaring to tear her apart. He used his stone-breathing first form, Axe Wave, against Rogue, but Rogue blocked and precisely deflected the attack to break Moran's handcuffs. Rogue told them both to fall back as Red Silk continued to move closer to her. Red Silk's strikes were fierce and precise, but Rogue still managed to dodge his attacks skillfully. Moran watched in awe, amazed at their high-level skills. Red Silk then used his stone-breathing sixth form, Cannonball Barrage, sending an all-directional strike against Rogue, who narrowly dodged every single strike. As the attack continued, Rogue also continued blocking and dodging all of Red Silk's strikes. Little by little, Rogue managed to deflect his enemy's strike, up to the point that she mastered deflecting all of Red Silk's attack. Seeing that, Red Silk doubled the number of his cannonball strikes, so Rogue deflected them quickly to Red Silk's allies, who were watching around them. Rogue then used her ghostly punches to block the remaining cannonball strikes, and paved a way for her to reach Red Silk, who was also ready to strike with his axes. Rogue successfully deflected his opponent's other attacks, pissing him off even more. Red Silk then mocked Rogue, telling her that dodging was all she could do. Rogue quietly responded that it was not, shocking Red Silk as Rogue managed to find an open spot for attack. Rogue then lunged towards him to deliver a punch, but Red Silk mocked her attack, calling it too light to deal damage, and blamed her skeletal body for having no damage. Red Silk punched Rogue in the skull, sending him crashing into a concrete chair, and telling her that the dead should not walk among the living. However, before he could continue, he suddenly felt immense pressure crushing him down with the pain that traveled all over his body. Rogue then calmly continued Red Silk's words, telling him that the dead must turn to dust while the living should remember them and move forward. She then emerged from the dust, asking why the village chief, who was alive, was now on his knees while the dead one still stood tall. Rogue, with his menacing aura, was ready to unleash a finishing blow with his sword. Then she pointed the sword at his neck, asserted her dominance, and told him that it was time to talk. Red Silk realized that Rogue had completely overwhelmed him, and it reminded him of his training with his master in his childhood days. That said, he admitted his defeat and asked what Rogue wanted. Rogue ordered him to gather all the chiefs of the northern tribes, telling him that they would attack the Empire. Red Silk laughed at his bold dream but agreed to summon everyone soon. He then told Rogue that the gathering of the northern tribes would happen soon, but he still did not trust him, so until then, Rogue must wait at Harriet's mansion. Rogue was surprised to hear about a mansion, but Red Silk scoffed, asking if he was an idiot for not knowing that Harriet owned one. He then explained that Harriet's real name was Sword Hawker, Harriet the heir to the White Lion tribe. In the northern mountain range within the Red Ram tribal territory, the Sword Hawker Harriet's mansion stood under the cold mist. Harriet then went straight to the door and he invited his party members to go inside his mansion. Rogue was utterly shocked at Harriet's sudden personality shift. Harriet quietly mentioned that he had already abandoned the name Hawker the day he ran away from the mountains. He never wanted to keep any ties to that house and admitted to Rogue and Moran that the place felt uncomfortable for him, so he told them to call him if anything came up. As he walked away, Rogue pointed out that Harriet seemed like an entirely different person now, which Moran agreed to. Not long after, the caretaker of Harriet's mansion, Ban's son, stepped out to greet them, introducing himself politely. Rogue stepped forward and introduced himself as Ben Lyra, and when he turned to introduce Moran, Ban's son chuckled, recognizing her immediately. He then asked if she had been well all this time, which Moran confirmed. Ban's son explained to Rogue that Moran was the gardener's daughter, who used to tend to the mansion's flower beds. Though she may have acted as Harriet's friend due to the situation, she was still his servant. Rogue asked Moran and Ban's son to tell him more about Harriet, but Moran stayed quiet. Meanwhile, Ban's son confirmed that Harriet truly was an heir who had once stayed with the Red Ram tribe temporarily to study. He went there to be acknowledged as a warrior and to learn the ways of leadership as the future village chief. He had come there along with his servants because it was the perfect place to gain experience, given the constant territorial wars with Imperial Knights. Ban's son continued, telling her that Ariel diligently studied, but after repeated failures in the Great Hunt, he felt frustrated, and he went into hiding along with Moran. The servants, who could no longer wait for him, returned to White Lion tribe, leaving Ban's son alone to tend to the mansion. When Rogue asked why he chose to stay behind, Ban's son smiled warmly. telling her that someone had to keep the house clean for Harriet's return. Rogue realized that Moran felt the same, as she still believed in him. Meanwhile, Harriet was lying down quietly in his room, overwhelmed by his thoughts. Meanwhile, Rogue saw Moran outside, brushing through the soil as she tended to the flower beds, explaining that her family used to be Harriet's gardeners. She expressed her faith that Harriet would have made a fine chief, though she admitted that was not the reason she ran away with him. That said, Moran decided to tell Rogue a bit of an old story. In the past, Moran's father, Pusame, knelt down before the White Lion tribe's chief, Hawker Lyman Reese, who welcomed them warmly to their tribe's land. Lyman called it the will of their mother mountain that they fled and arrived there. As they talked, Moran and Harriet saw each other for the first time. Lyman then turned to Harriet and told him that Moran was about his age, asking him to show her around the territory. Moments later, they went outside, where Harriet introduced himself to her. Moran then offered him something that looked like pink cotton candy, making Harriet laugh awkwardly, telling her that tribute was not necessary. But in a moment of realization, he yelled in disgust, realizing it was northern goat poop. Moran then looked at him with a peace sign, telling him it's a prank, and revealed her name. Harriet, embarrassed, stammered that he outranked her and warned that if she behaved like that, she might get punished. Harriet was shocked when Moran asked him if rank was really that important. She then reiterated to Harriet whether that status he talked about was more important than having fun together. Harriet looked at her with hesitation, but admitted that it was not. Moran laughed again, teasingly calling him a dummy for standing still, and pulled him along with her. Amidst the peaceful day, the two started ganging up on a wild boar as if it were some kind of monster they needed to take down. While playing around, a group of children secretly watched them from behind the bushes. Moran called out to them and invited them to join in. The children came out, so the two introduced themselves to them, telling them that Harriet was a sad boy with no friends. Harriet then gave them a peace sign, and soon enough, everyone began to play together, with their laughter echoing across the fields. Harriet reflected on how different Moran was from others. She did not worship him, did not flatter him to gain favor or try to get anything from him. She did not see him as the village chief's son, but his true self, so Harriet blushed because it was his first time he felt that way. A few years later, Harriet and Moran lay together on a quiet field, where Harriet asked her if he could ever become like his father. Moran sensed his concern about becoming the next village chief of the tribe and told him not to worry too much about it because she believed in him. Days later, Harriet went to the village of the Red Ram tribe, where he knelt before Red Silk, the village chief, who will be his mentor. Red Silk vowed to teach him everything so he could fulfill his duty. Their training began, and Red Silk sat atop a massive stone while Harriet struggled to pull it across the ground with his own strength. Red Silk explained that without authority, he could not speak nor guarantee unity among his people. In the next scene, Red Silk taught him how to analyze a battlefield, reminding him that a single careless moment could cost the lives of his tribe's people. Later, Red Silk led Harriet into a vast library, where they held 2,250 books containing very classified information. He ordered Harriet to learn them all, so he maxed out his brain storage until his nose started bleeding from information overload. He questioned himself silently whether he could really do it, but the memory of Moran's smile flashed before his eyes. Then, with renewed determination, he pushed himself further, whispering to himself to stay strong. About a year after Harriet began his training under the Red Lamb tribe, a man wearing a white robe came to Harriet's mansion. Moran and Bansan listened to what he told them, which made Moran drop a flower plot. The news spread like wildfire, and Moran learned that Harriet had run away. In the past, her red shirt listened to a tale that was passed down through generations, the story about the hero's party and the defeat of the Demon King. As usual, it was a story told by an old man, and children like her red shirt held it close to their hearts, dreaming of it with admiration. They remembered the sight of a fierce warrior protecting everyone with her shield and sword, and the tribe's warrior following behind her commands with respect in their eyes. Her red shirt trained so hard, wishing to be just like them, and he held that longing deep within his heart. He carried that dream with respect in both hands and placed his life upon the edge of the sword, but in the end, all that remained was a broken-hearted boy. Not long after, the blizzard started raging around the mountains. Bansan tried to stop Moran from leaving, and he warned her that even the strong warriors were staying back in that weather. However, Moran had already decided, so Bansan asked her if she even knew where her red shirt was. Despite everything that Bansan had told her, Moran continued walking away. Moran told herself that she knew where her red shirt was, so despite the freezing cold and thick snow, she continued going to her destination. Soon enough, Moran reached her destination, the Northern Adventurers' Village. Meanwhile, inside a pub, her red shirt sat drinking alone in despair. Soon enough, Moran opened the door and appeared before her red shirt, who was drowned in the spirit of PG grape juice. Her red shirt looked at her with a faint smile and called out her name. Moran, on the other hand, felt great relief upon seeing him safe, but she looked at him straight in the eye, asking him why he ran away. Her red shirt then looked at her and told her that the life he had before didn't suit him at all because he was useless. Moran felt sad seeing him in that state, so she decided to start walking towards him. Suddenly, Moran grabbed him by the collar, furious, and told him not to talk BS about himself. Moran reminded him that he was the one who once wanted to be the greatest village chief, so he demanded to know who had told him otherwise. Harriet looked at her with despair, revealing it was his mentor who made him feel that way. Moran stood in shock as he recounted his mentor's words, telling him that once was inexperience, twice was a mistake, the third time was stubbornness, and the fourth was just incompetence. Harriet dropped the bottle of PG grape juice and confessed that he had failed the Great Hunt exam 4 times in a row. He then admitted that he lacked the instincts needed for battle. He wasn't gifted in magic as well. He had no remarkable skills or special abilities, and he was neither a brilliant strategist. He told himself that he didn't have anything, and the only good thing he had ever been told was that he had good instincts. He recalled being told 1,000 times that he was unfit to be a warrior, and told Moran that she would not understand because she had never stood in that position before. Harriet felt like everyone looked at him with expectations, while he kept falling and getting crushed by his own despair. Moran then asked him again if that was why he ran away, and Harriet told her that at least it was easier to breathe there than it was back home. He explained that in that place, no mentor was breathing down his neck, no tribesmen were treating him like a noble. Moran then asked Harriet again if that was the man he really wanted to become. Harriet then sat on the floor, grabbing his hair in frustration, telling Moran that he didn't know anymore what he truly wanted. After 2 years in the Northern Adventurers Village, Moran spoke to Harriet about a new request from Spear Tower Village. She explained that the request had been coming in for years since their adventurer guild had basically disbanded, so most of their work had been redirected to them. That said, Harriet grabbed his shield and told Moran that they should go already, which Moran happily agreed to. Moran thought to herself that Harriet was not quite like he used to be, but he seemed brighter than before. Harriet then headed down first, and Moran told him that she would follow soon. As she watched him leave, she thought that the fact he still carried that shield meant there was still a chance that Harriet might change his mind. Suddenly, Rogue appeared in their guild with her overlord appearance. And at that point, Moran knew that something was about to change. Back in the present, Moran told Rogue that when Harriet was with Rogue, she could see glimpses of the old Harriet he once knew. Moran explained that Harriet's ability was more like Rogue's before, admitting that her 2 megabyte brain cells were no good with words. Moran then asked if Rogue was serious about taking Harriet as her disciple, explaining that Harriet had so much potential, but he was struggling because he clashed with his mentor. She then looked at Rogue, and at that point, Rogue knew what Harriet needed. At that moment, someone banged on Harriet's door, so he asked who was there. Suddenly, Rogue crushed through the door with a punch, shocking Harriet in the process. Rogue then peeped in the hole, calling him out for training. Soon after, Rogue dragged him outside, telling him to stop playing around. Rogue smiled at him, telling Harriet that he was not allowed to rest until he died. Harriet then asked why she was acting like that when she had just heard his tragic backstory. Pissed off, Rogue smacked him on the head, telling him to shut his stinky mouth. Harriet wondered how Rogue knew his past, so Moran laughed and told him that Rogue had good hearing. Rogue then assured him that she was not planning to teach him as a joke, admitting that Harriet had piqued her interest. Harriet, still dizzy from the hit to his head, spoke nonsense like a madman. Moran, on the other hand, laughed genuinely, telling Rogue that Harriet's clumsiness was kind of cute. Rogue was confused with her words while Moran looked at the half-conscious Harriet. Several days later, a man was walking with his wooden foot, calling out to his allies' names and apologizing to them. He claimed that at that point he could not go to Valhalla because he was the only one who had survived from the wild wolves or the Imperial soldiers led by Escher. The village chief turned to Rogue and Moran, asking about Harriet's whereabouts. Rogue told him that she was teaching Harriet a few things, so he was currently occupied. After hearing that, Red Silk began insulting Harriet, calling him a failure. But Rogue disagreed, telling him that he had no good eye for people. Rogue mocked him, telling him that he failed to recognize Harriet's immense potential, and even asked him if his eyes were just mere decorations. The insult made Red Silk furious, but before he could respond, someone called out to him from outside, making Moran grow worried. Red Silk looked with irritation, complaining that the tribe had become far too noisy before asking the gatekeeper who it was. The gatekeeper informed him that a survivor from the Coastal Defense Unit had arrived, so he ordered them to bring the man inside. The survivor knelt before the village chief, bowing his head, and pleaded for an attack against the Empire. However, Red Silk immediately refused his request, explaining that attacking the Empire would spark a massive war, and asked how he could fight in his current state. Red Silk reminded him that avoiding unnecessary battles was wiser, then ordered him to return to his post and fulfill his duties properly. The survivor burst out in anger, shouting if he felt no rage at all about the situation. He warned that the Empire could strike at any moment, making Rogue ask Red Silk who the man was. Red Silk explained that he was one of the few survivors of the coastal defense ambushed by the Empire's army. Back then, the survivor had been lying on the ground with his crushed leg when one of the village soldiers informed him that they had lost the war. Another surviving warrior called out for help, but an enemy struck his head with a sword, eliminating him right before them. That sight gave him a trauma that had haunted him up to the present time. Back in the present, Miran was surprised after Rogue told her that she had what it took to become a northern warrior. Rogue further explained to Miran that she felt it from the vibration of her bones, confronting her about pretending to fail the great hunt for Harriet. Caught off guard, Miran changed the topic by asking her how Harriet was doing. Rogue told her that Harriet should be able to overcome his past and have the warrior's will to become a legitimate northern warrior. Back when Rogue was still in her human form, she recalled worrying about how she could teach that will to others. However, she realized that it could not be taught until someone felt it for themselves. That said, Rogue concluded that perhaps her role was to offer guidance from the past. Even though she considered herself incomplete, she vowed to awaken the potential sleeping inside Harriet, so that when the time was right, he could prove himself as the great warrior he failed to become during the Great Hunt. 7 days later, at the entrance of the northern mountain range, Frey was mad, scolding her soldiers for eating snow. Soon after, Escher, the former captain of the Imperial Northern Garrison, appeared before her, mocking Frey for still being with her stupid soldiers. Frey defended them, telling him that they might seem dumb, but each one could take on 100 men. One soldier jokingly mixed blood with snow, calling it strawberry bingsu, and another praised his genius idea. Frey then asked Escher what brought him to her, wondering if he was still after the title of 4 Knights. Escher told her that he did not have time for her BS because he only came to deal with Rogue. Just then, Escher asked why Frey chose to stay in the mountains instead of sending her troops ahead. Frey told him that she had no reason to explain herself to an ugly, disgusting loser like him. After hearing that, Escher called her pathetic, and told her that he would not wait like a coward before showing his massive army along with him. At that moment, a soldier put them on ready mode, ordering the 4th platoon to head into the northern mountains for reconnaissance. Escher then grinned and muttered that Rogue should be ready to pay for ruining his handsome face. Meanwhile, back at the tribe's camp, Rogue, Miran, and Harriet entered the tent where Red Silk looked bothered, informing them that the Imperial army had invaded the mountains already. Red Silk explained that the Empire was sending a massive army advancing from the coast to tear through the mountains. He was devastated because he knew that the messengers he had sent to other tribes would not make it in time. That said, Red Silk officially declared a full-scale war against the Empire. Rogue then asked for his permission to clear the way, placing a hand on Harriet's head and declaring that she would go. The battle began, and the Imperial soldiers clashed with the Northern warriors in brutal combat, and neither of the two forces was willing to back down. While standing on top of a cliff, Rogue was watching the chaos. Once again, she found herself in a battlefield, but that one felt different because she knew she would no longer run from her duty, bearing the tribe's hopes on her back as she stood with a solemn heart. Suddenly, a voice shouted for her to move aside, and upon turning, she saw the same survivor who once begged Red Silk to fight. His leg remained crushed, yet he refused to sit idly in a medical tent while others fought. Recognizing him, Rogue told him to calm down because she would not dare stand in the way of a warrior's decision made for honor. Rogue then asked him if he was seeking revenge, but the survivor denied it, explaining that he and his comrades were the glorious shields of the tribe who guarded the coast. He was ashamed of failing his mission, and that was why he must fight to complete what he started. Hearing that, Rogue asked him what would happen if they were to disturb the peace of the dead and summon the two. The survivor was startled by her question, calling it a dishonorable dark art, but if there was a deeper reason to raise the dead, that would be if what they once defended was being invaded again. Hearing that, Rogue extended her hand to him, asking him to allow her to fight with his honor just for a while. With no hesitation, the survivor grabbed Rogue's hand, and she activated her full-scale dark magic, causing a blinding light burst in the area, momentarily halting the battle. The survivor stared in confusion as Rogue called out to the fallen northern warriors, telling them to raise their heads. To his surprise, the dead soldiers of the coastal defense rose again, summoned from the realm beyond. The banner of the defense unit was raised high in the sky, and the undead coastal defense unit returned at once. Rogue lit the fire in their souls as she told them that the mother mountain they had protected was once again under invasion. Suddenly, an undead soldier split the head of the invading enemy soldier, and together they advanced against the enemy soldiers. Rogue instructed all remaining soldiers to go to the operational area as their final mission had been issued, commanding them to complete their mission and return before the night was over. The survivor wept upon seeing his allies once again, and beneath their flag consecrated by honor, he raised his sword with all his might. Meanwhile, the Imperial Knights were fast approaching, but when the enemy trespasses upon their land, they would do anything to protect it from invaders. Rogue then gave his final commands to the undead before saluting their honorable existence. She knew that the battlefield was too early for her Harriet, but she believed everything could be a learning opportunity. Thanks to the return of the defense unit, the balance on the battlefield had been restored. That said, Rogue commanded Harriet and Miran to prove themselves, which was something they had not done during the Great Hunt. Her Harriet was terrified at the thought of a real battlefield, because Rogue explained to him that a war was chaos on all sides, where death passed by like the wind in a cold place, where life was easily broken. Rogue then asked him if he could prove himself on the battlefield, which he immediately denied. That said, Rogue hit his head, telling him to clear his mind, explaining that war by nature was both a responsibility and a curse. Rogue put her fist to his heart, telling him to never back down. When her Harriet asked her where she would go, Rogue told him that she had to settle a score with Frey, who had just joined the battlefield along with her soldiers. Frey was delighted that Rogue was finally using her undead legion. All of a sudden, Rogue jumped high from the cliff, leaving a massive impact that shocked both her Harriet and Moran. Her ominous presence glowed in mid-air like a star, ready to crash herself against Frey. In no time, Rogue clashed her sword against Frey, who managed to block it, causing massive destruction in the area. Her Harriet, with his newfound confidence, wore his war helmet, ready to join the fight as a true warrior of the North. Meanwhile, the Imperial soldiers led by Escher commanded their mage squads to prepare to fire, while their shield-bearers protected them. Her Harriet fearlessly faced the enemy soldiers, who were ready to cast their all-out magical attacks. Her Harriet then jumped above, higher than their attacks, and used his parkour skills to go behind them, shocking the leading knight in the process. Before he could react, her Harriet lunged against the enemy, eliminating him in the process. After successfully doing his attack, Moran was surprised to see that his movements were completely different. It turned out that Harriet had reached the mosquito-level flexibility and smooth joints, giving him an explosive and overwhelming muscular elasticity. Meanwhile, Frey was mocking Rogue again for not focusing on their battle. Rogue, however, could not help but think of how Rogue mimicked the movement of the warrior he admired. Her Harriet then moved again, ready to show off more of his skills on the battlefield. He threw a string knife at an enemy soldier while he eliminated the others using his short blade. Seeing that, Rogue realized that Harriet was like her, a hybrid rogue warrior. A dual class, Rogue then realized that on the battlefield, Harriet had no fear. A perfect description for a true northern warrior. While Rogue was thinking of her disciple, Frey was pissed off big time, and he was about to deliver a finishing blow. Rogue managed to dodge her deadly kick, causing massive destruction around the area. Then Frey quickly followed her attack with a barrage of powerful punches, forcing Rogue to block every single blow with her ghostly punches. Unfortunately, one punch managed to slip through her defense, and Frey quickly grabbed him by the neck, slamming him to the ground, causing a massive explosion in the area. Harriet quickly noticed it and became worried for his master. Meanwhile, Escher used his beast-breathing ninth form, Wolf Cloud, cutting several undead soldiers before him. The attack was about to reach Harriet, but Moran blocked the attack in the nick of time, saving him in the process. Moran reminded Harriet not to let his guard down, so Harriet thanked her for saving him. Meanwhile, Escher was grinning like a true menace before expressing his annoyance with Frey, who was stealing his prey. He paid attention to both Harriet and Moran because their movements were the same as Rogue's. That said, Escher decided to take down the two warriors first for his appetizer before the feast. The three of them then engaged in a battle, with Escher using his beast-breathing 11th form, Doan-style ultimate roar against the two. Moran managed to dodge the attack and commended Harriet for doing the same. At that point, Harriet felt a different sensation, a feeling of himself being free. Escher, however, taunted him for running around like a scared rat, but suddenly his past encounter with Rogue flashed in his mind. Pissed off, Escher used his beast-breathing first form Wolf Hunt, unleashing several sword slashes against his enemies. Harriet noticed that Escher could only use one technique per breath, so he took that quick opportunity to retaliate. Moran then smashed the shield on his back, sending him like a cannonball to Escher's location. However, Escher grinned like a true menace, making Harriet falter upon realizing that his breathing technique was not over yet. And just like that, Escher unleashed his beast-breathing sixth form, Howling Wolf, a deadly consecutive sword thrust that looked like severe wolf bites. Suddenly, blood splashed like a fountain, and the memories of Moran with Harriet too quickly flashed in her memory. The memories gradually became blurry until she could barely picture it in her mind. Back when the two were younger, Moran had loved the stories of the Northern Warriors because of Harriet, and since then, they had always sung the hymn of the Northern Warriors together. At present, Moran told Harriet not to go ahead of her, leaving Harriet in great shock upon seeing that Moran used herself as a shield to protect him. As the clash of the Empire's soldiers and the Northern Mountain Range undead warriors continued, massive impacts took place as Rogue and Frey clashed with one another. Their swords swung against each other, and every swing was heard as their swords clashed with each other in a fast manner. As usual, Frey aggressively attacked Rogue, forcing her slashes against her opponent. But Rogue had had enough of his anger management problem, so she gave her the taste of her own medicine. On the other hand, Rogue went back on his defense mode, blocking every swing from her opponent's sword. Suddenly, Frey used some footwork called Spiral Style, which made Rogue a little confused. And just like that, Frey delivered a massive, destructive attack called Axis of the Earth, Horizon Breaker. Rogue blocked the attack with her sword, but was still pushed back by the sheer force of Frey's attack. Luckily, after enduring so much impact, she was able to fully stop Frey's attack. Rogue was a bit relieved to survive that massive impact, which even eliminated the soldiers who were caught in it. Meanwhile, Frey stepped on the eliminated bloody soldiers like they were some sort of red carpet for her arrival. Rogue held her sword, ready for Frey, who wondered if Rogue blocked the attack intentionally to protect her comrades behind her. Frey found it strange that an undead like her would protect her comrades, and called her mean for not feeling bad for her soldiers, who she was literally stepping on. Rogue put a stop to her BS, and told her that her comrades were suffering from her smelly feet. Frey was confused about what Rogue was talking about, so she looked down at her feet and felt disgusted by the sight. She then approached Rogue with her feet soaked in blood, laughing at her words and explaining that the corpses were basically lumps of meat. Rogue was speechless, but suddenly Frey asked her a question about whether she deliberately alternated using one hand at a time while she was fighting. Frey was pissed off by Rogue, asking her why she was not using her two fists at the same time because she felt like something kept breaking the flow. Frey then speculated that perhaps Rogue was forced into a specific role during a party combat, and told her more of her assumptions. Rogue remained quiet as Frey kept on telling her analysis of her fighting style during a party fight encounter. And after all considerations, Frey concluded that her opponent was a rogue. Hearing that, Rogue told Frey that she was pretty smart even though her face looked like an ugly, disgusting, drug-overdosed tramp. Frey then laughed at her, telling her that she kept worrying about her comrades. Frey even told Rogue that even though she might look like a small fry, she knew that Aesir could not handle her but not her. Suddenly, Frey jumped quickly to Rogue's location with a menacing aura, while her hand held her opponent's sword. Frey then quickly swung her sword, ready to deliver a finishing blow. She relentlessly chased Rogue down, with her spiral-style Axis of the Earth Horizon Breaker eliminating more soldiers on their way. Frey then asked Rogue what move she would use next. While Frey delivered her absolute sword slash, Rogue moved downwards, ready to penetrate her bony fingers to Frey's heavenly floodgate. But Frey quickly noticed it. That said, Rogue cut her leg instead with her blade, causing her blood to splash like a fountain. Frey felt the penetration of the hard sword into her meat, so she stomped the ground so strongly that it created a strong impact. Frey then contracted her muscles to stop the bleeding, shocking Rogue in the process. Rogue wondered how Frey managed to dodge with a cut leg, analyzing the situation like a real pro. Suddenly, Rogue somehow figured out the answer to her question. Frey then asked her why her movements were full of holes because she seemed to strike, but there would always be a one-beat gap. She even wondered if the sword was too heavy for her because she was struggling to fight her. Rogue's attention then shifted to Harriet, who held an unconscious Moran in his arms. Meanwhile, Frey was once again pissed off because Rogue was looking away again. That said, she managed to deliver a strong punch to Rogue's skull, sending her flying backwards. The impact was so strong that it created a massive explosion in the area where Rogue landed. While Rogue was still on the ground, Frey called her heartless because while there were many lives dying on the battlefield, her eyes were only locked onto her own lackeys. While Rogue seemed pissed off by Frey's words, the voice of the former Demon King was heard again by Rogue, telling her that she was really heartless beyond measure. The voice guilt-tripped Rogue, asking her why she could not save her other comrades. Nonetheless, the voice told him not to mind it because it was not her fault. Then, the voice showed him a fighting scene where both living humans were fighting and killing one another with no hesitation at all, explaining that humans were corrupted breeds. The voice urged her to give up and accept her fate as the new Demon King, just like the previous ones. The voice also told her that even if she picked up the sword for the world, eventually she would swing her sword against the world. Just then, Moran chimed in her memory lane, recalling their past conversation. Apparently, Rogue apologized for what happened to Moran's hometown, but Moran shrugged it off, telling her that it was not her fault that the bad guys invaded them. Moran told Rogue that the two of them were warriors who would fight to protect, so there was no need for an apology. She reminded Rogue that she was a fighter from the North, and with the will of the North, they simply had to step onto the battlefield. That said, Moran told her that she should not blame herself anymore, and so Rogue's will to fight was restored. Meanwhile, Frey took another opportunity to attack Rogue, but Rogue seemed to have remembered his old roots as a northern warrior. That said, even if her comrades fell on the battlefield, she should not hesitate at all. Rogue then remembered all those who were crushed into dust and how he delivered their wishes to the future. That said, Rogue moved her feet as a northern warrior, along with the will of the two heroes who departed before her, and recalling Hero's words became his point of awakening. Frey leapt above Rogue, ready to deliver yet another fatal finishing blow. As expected, the impact of her attack was too destructive, but Rogue swung her blade and cut through Frey's attack, delivering a massive injury to Frey's body. Frey could not believe her eyes as Rogue's sword was split into two, and Rogue herself was emanating a menacing aura. Rogue then reiterated Frey's question about her fighting style, and Rogue told her that what she had witnessed was the true answer. Rogue delivered a strong twin-blade attack, Mountain Boar Crushing Slash, sending Frey flying backwards like a missile. Frey then realized that the reason her fighting style kept breaking was that Rogue was originally a dual sword wielder. Frey laughed and continued yapping, but before she could even finish, Rogue delivered her dark-breathing 8th form, clashing twin-blade impact against Frey. Frey was once again sent flying backwards while Rogue continued to chase her down. The attack was massive, the impact was too destructive, and yet Rogue still delivered strong ghostly punches against the menace. While in that predicament, Frey recalled the words of a man who once belittled her, telling her that she was a knight in war who could not fathom the pain of death or agony that matches it. The man's words, calling her arrogant yet pitiful, were carved in her heart, and so even at her worst, injured state, she still told Rogue not to look down on her. Rogue was suddenly alarmed because she sensed a danger coming from Frey, who despite her worst state still put on her battle stance, spiral style. Just then, she delivered an extremely powerful attack, Heavenly Axis, Heaven and Earth Splitter, causing a massive part of the mountain peak to split. However, Rogue was determined to defeat her, so her bones recalled the technique of Hero that defeated the former Demon King. To survive, Rogue retaliated with a northern-style hunting technique as Frey's attack fully engulfed her. The splitting of the mountain peak was witnessed by the soldiers fighting below the mountain, and suddenly, another attack crushed the split part of the mountain, turning the blue sky crimson. It turned out that Rogue infused her last attack with Evil Annihilation Quake, inspired by the Ascalon, Dragon Slayer Slash, completely defeating Frey in the process. As the avalanche occurred, Hari told Moran that everything would be fine, but his eyes filled with fear upon seeing Moran in that condition. Moran's injury doesn't stop bleeding, and so Haritol grew agitated and extremely worried. As Moran's blood continued to come out, Haritol was begging it to come back and stop already. He then hugged her, begging Moran not to leave her alone in that world full of despair. Suddenly, Isher stepped closer to them, asking Harit if it was his first time witnessing a comrade die before calling him an ugly, pathetic, hopeless romantic loser. Haritol then looked at Isher with glaring eyes and declared to absolutely kill Isher himself. His words pissed off Isher, causing him to slap Haritol so hard. Soon enough, Isher looked at the face of Haritol, since he managed to destroy his war helmet with his bare hands. Isher told Haritol, who was holding Moran dearly, to keep bubbling all he wanted, calling him a barbarian who did not know true justice. Just then, Haritol prepared to deliver his finishing blow. However, a split second before he could carry out his plan, an explosion of massive impact happened in the area. When the dust cleared, Rogue appeared before them, telling Isher that if they were barbarians, then he must be an ugly monkey that they will eliminate. Seeing her, Haritol immediately felt relieved by the presence of his master. On the other hand, Isher got back on his feet, showing a menacing aura upon seeing Rogue. Meanwhile, Rogue told Haritol to cool his head, and he would buy him some time. Rogue gripped his sword and told him to stay calm. Isher realized that Frey was defeated before telling Rogue that she was so heartless. He looked at her with a straight eye, telling Rogue that she might have found a new pet because she seemed to forget about her disciple. Rogue then recalled the aftermath of the battlefield, and Frey's question about whether she did not feel pity for the dying Imperial soldiers. Rogue admitted that since the Imperial soldiers had homes and families waiting for them, she felt a little guilty. However, Rogue told Ashur that what had already happened had happened, and if she would not save her comrade, they would surely die. While Frey's words about her focusing only on her lackeys flashed in her mind, Rogue decided to move closer to Escher. Escher looked at Rogue, and Rogue did the same, and not long after, their swords clashed, causing an impact that sent them both backwards. Escher looked at Rogue, who was telling him that she would annihilate her enemies and protect her comrades. Then, with a menacing glare, Rogue told Escher that she would not hesitate anymore. Rogue then asked Harriet, who was still holding Muran in his arms, to make a decision as well. The impact of the fight between them was visually seen on the snowy mountain. Muran groaned in pain with her weak voice, so Harriet called her name and told her that Rogue fought Escher in an intense battle to buy them some time so they could call for help. However, Muran told him not to worry about her and that she wanted Harriet to help Rogue in her fight. Harriet disagreed and told her that they should get out of the battlefield immediately, but Muran punched him with her remaining strength and told him to go and help Rogue because that was his role. With her remaining strength, Muran told him not to give in to his anger. Muran wanted him to overcome despair and rage to have a dream, where he would walk with Rogue and take care of her dream. With his final words, Muran told Harriet to go, and she touched his face, telling him to protect everyone. As she shed her last tears, Muran left everything to Harriet and called him Chief before completely leaving the world of the living. Meanwhile, Rogue used yet another northern-style hunting technique, Frosty Grand Brawl, where her enhanced ghostly punches fell crushing from above. Escher laughed so hard, telling Rogue that her attacks were getting nerfed, so she must have a hard time fighting against Free. He also told Rogue that she was perhaps worried that her two lackeys might have emotional breakdowns from what happened. With renewed confidence, Escher delivered a devastating kick against Rogue, who blocked his attack and told him that Harriet would not break. Rogue used her dark-breathing third form Dividing Slash, which created a gap between her and Escher. Escher did not falter at all, and he delivered another devastating kick, hitting Rogue on her head and telling her that baseless encouragement could only destroy people. Rogue got mad and retaliated, giving him a ghostly punch and telling him to stop his BS. She reiterated that what he gave Harriet was hope and that he would not be blinded by rage because he was her disciple and a true warrior of the North. Unfortunately, while Rogue lunged towards Escher, her body started experiencing excruciating pain. Rogue knew that it was the after effects of her previous battle with Frey. Meanwhile, Escher, with his menacing aura, took the opportunity to deliver a finishing blow against his opponent. With his eye full of hatred, Escher told Rogue that he caught her off guard. However, before he could put his evil plan into action, Harriet came and slashed his body with his sword. Harriet was about to deliver a finishing blow, but Escher jumped 2 meters away from him. Rogue thanked Harriet for buying her some time, but Harriet thanked Rogue instead, telling her that her words cooled down his head. Escher spat some blood and realized that he had lost one eye and received severe damage from Harriet's sword. Harriet caressed his hair, and with an eye filled with determination, he told Escher that it was time to switch players, making Escher feel very mad and declare that he would kill him. Harriet quickly jumped towards the enemy, leaving Rogue dumbfounded by his disciple's skill. Harriet and Escher then ran towards each other to have a close combat. While facing Escher, Harriet had many things on his mind that he wanted to apologize to Moran. While blocking every sword slash from Escher, Harriet was thinking of the day they ran down from the mountain. When he used his parkour skills to dodge a massive slash from Escher, Harriet was thinking of the things he should be grateful for Moran. Rogue could only watch the impact of two strong forces clashing with each other. As the sword clash between Escher and Harriet continued, Harriet also continued apologizing to Moran. Then Harriet decided to take a big leap and attack Escher in the process. However, Escher retaliated with a strong sword slash, forcing Harriet to use his shield and pushing him backward due to the impact. Harriet's wooden shield was almost tattered, but his eyes were showing determination that Harriet had never shown before. He threw his shield, and the two warriors lunged at each other. Harriet kept on apologizing over and over as he fought Escher, who on the other hand only cared about defeating all his opponents. Once again, their clash caused a massive impact around them. Soon after, blood dripped on the snow, revealing that in their clash they both managed to penetrate each other's bodies. Harriet managed to stop Escher's sword from penetrating deeper into his body by holding the blade itself. On the other hand, Escher managed to stop Harriet's sword from penetrating deeper into his body by holding his hand. Escher quickly let go of Harriet's hand and delivered a punch to his opponent's ugly face. He threw him several more punches, telling him to let go of the sword already. Despite the excruciating pain that he was in, Harriet stood his ground, gritting his teeth from so much pain. Then he mustered up all his remaining strength to shout so loud and impaled the sword deeper into Escher's body. The pain crawled up all over Escher's body, so he quickly pulled out his sword from Harriet's body, ready to deliver his finishing blow. Seeing this, Rogue could only shout his disciple's name. Escher slashed his sword against Harriet, who managed to dodge it by quickly kneeling to the ground. Harriet's eyes were still filled with determination, and he delivered a deadly slash against Escher's, who managed to dodge it by jumping higher in mid-air. However, at that point, Rogue chimed in, throwing his one plate against Escher, impaling him from his back in the process. Realizing what just happened, Escher could only curse Rogue for what she had done. At that critical moment, Rogue told Harriet to move already. Suddenly, a massive magic circle appeared on the ground, causing confusion among the enemies. It turned out that earlier that day they were in their campsite tent, explaining how they could lure the enemies into the specific areas of the mountain that could trigger an avalanche. Seeing the magic circle, Rogue shouted at their allied soldiers to escape already. The enemy soldiers were stopped by the undead army, so the living allied soldiers received the escape order. Escher realized what was happening, and he could only get mad at their current situation. While being distracted, Harriet was preparing to deliver his finishing blow, telling Escher that it was the end. Harriet, with all his remaining strength, unleashed his northern-style hunting technique. Then, the memory of Moran bringing him some flowers. Harriet then used his flame-breathing first form, Flame Dance, Undead Vicious Hound Unleashed, splitting Escher's body into two. Escher groaned in so much pain, spitting too much blood in the process. Meanwhile, Harriet was breathing heavily because he had used almost every ounce of his energy. He stood in the middle of the snowy mountain, bidding his farewell to Moran. Soon enough, Rogue appeared before him, calling his name, when suddenly an avalanche came crushing down, ready to swallow Harriet alive. Rogue then quickly moved her body and was desperately trying to reach Harriet, who simply looked at her with sincere eyes. Moments later, the avalanche completely settled down, officially putting an end to the dangerous war. Elsewhere, a mysterious man looked over a crystal ball, watching over Rogue, wondering why she had only started moving recently, and calling Rogue by her actual name, Ben Lyra Edward.
Guys, that's the end of the video. If you liked this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.